All right, so the next thing is storage. So RAM is where you're working. Storage is where you're putting everything. And I equate that to a cupboard space, right? So in the kitchen, you got way more cupboard space. In your house, you have a ton of storage space, right? You've got a storage space where you put all your blankets, but you're really only using two at any one time. So you need a ton of cupboard space or storage space for your life, right? We have so much of our life that's on the computer now. Uh, just as an example, right? You go out and buy a phone. When people start talking about phones and specifications on phones, they usually don't even talk about the RAM or memory that's in there. They talk about how much can I store on that? Does my phone have 256 gigabytes of storage, or does it have 12 or 24? That's way too low. And so this is not where you're working. This is where you're storing everything that you love. Oh, that music you downloaded totally legally, all the photos that you have of all your friends and the videos that you've taken, right? That's all on that storage. So you need a ton of storage. The thing you need to know, though, is that there's two types. There's one that's called a hard disk drive and one that's called a solid state drive. SSD is faster and more expensive. When you're talking about phones and you're talking about tablets, they don't even have hard drives. They all have SSDs. That's the way they work. They're also rated in gigabytes. Now we are getting to the terabyte level. So you can go out and get hard drives that are 4 terabytes. So that would be 4,000 gigabytes, right? So either you're getting gigabytes, like an SSD, a good size SSD would have 512 gigabytes of storage, or you're getting a hard disk that's even bigger. It also has a speed rating, but it's not as important. The more the better. Notice I don't say to a point, the more the better, because you're probably going to use that space. I mean, I guess if you get a 10 terabyte hard drive, you may not use that space, but usually the more the better. And upgrading to more does not affect the speed like RAM does. And that's something that I have students that are confused about. They'll think, well, I'm starting to run out of hard disk space, and that's probably making my machine slow. The only time that makes your machine slow, your computer slow, is when you have none left. When you have none left, then it's making it slow. But just adding more storage space doesn't do anything to speed up your computer, except for something we'll talk about in just a minute. All right, so quickly, I want to show you how the operating system works. So we've got some memory and RAM in your workspace here. And if you've got enough space right here in your RAM, your memory, then it'll just put everything it can over here, right, in this portion. So if you're working on a Word document and it's 184 pages long, if you got enough space in your RAM and your workspace, your memory, everything's fine. If you don't have enough space, it'll do this swapping process where it goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And that's the way it gets over that. So if you have Windows right now and you only have 4 gigs and you're like, well, my computer is slow, maybe that's why it is. It is because what's happening is you'll load up something and it'll look and say, you know what, they haven't used this for a few seconds. So I'll swap it down to the hard disk. I'll just push it over there. And then when they ask for it again, I'll swap it back in. And it goes through this process where it's constantly swapping back and forth. And that really slows down your computer. So if this is an SSD, you're a little better off than if it's a hard disk. It'll be a little faster. All right, so this is what a hard disk looks like. We're not going to go through all the details, but you can pause this video and look at that if you'd like. But that's what a hard disk is. It actually is called a hard disk because these are hard. They're actually a silver-covered platters, and this is an ARM that reads it. It is magnetic in the way that it works. I actually had a person that I worked with, and he actually showed me at a little tiny magnifying glass especially made for this, and you could actually see where the magnetic material would be pulled up into piles, and that's how it stores the ones and zeros. Is that it's just amazing stuff, but because it's mechanical, it could cease to work because the platters are spinning, but it's also slower, and it's because the platters, when they're spinning, they can't pull that data up anytime it wants to. Instead, it has to wait until this little tiny read head passes that data, and then it can take that data and give it to you. So when you say click, click, open that Word file or that photo, these things are spinning around in there, and that head is moving back and forth and reading the information that it needs to, and then giving it to you. These are usually much more massive, and they are less expensive. So it's good to use them for backups especially. Now, solid state drives, they work very, very different. There's no moving parts. It's all electrical. And the data can be accessed and written very quickly because you can see here there's a lot of different paths. It can just go in there and grab it and pull it out. It doesn't have to wait for that platter to spin around and hit the head, right? It's right there, boom. And normally they're 4 to 40 times faster than a hard disk drive. Oops, that should be an HDD. Sorry. I'm going to fix that now. Hard disk drive. But it's more expensive. This is the stuff that is used in our phones and our tablets because it's so slim, it's so small. Now, just in a comparison, I'm not going to stay on this too long. You can pause it and look at it. But in comparison, this shows you, hey, this is how fast things are, right? So if you're going to do a backup, a full backup that's got tons and tons of data that you need to do, your SSD will be done in 6 hours while your hard drive is taking 20 to 24 hours to do it. So it's much faster. That's why a lot of times your device, like your phone, will seem so much faster than your computer because it's got an SSD, and a lot of times your computer doesn't, and it's taking longer to find that data and give it to you. So those are the main components. CPU, main brain of the computer, it's rated in gigahertz. The higher the better, has multiple cores, right? And the higher the better for that too, more cores, better. And it has generations, the higher the better. RAM is your workspace. It's measured in gigabytes. Windows needs 4 gigs to run and 8 to run well. More than 16 is really not needed. It isn't. By the time you actually would use 32 gigs, your machine is just out of date and you got to replace other parts because now your CPU is too old, even though your RAM's good, right? We have that issue where a computer, if you're lucky, will last 6 years. And I don't mean it's going to die in 6 years. I mean that it just won't be useful in 6 years later. And so upgrading any one component too far usually does not pay off for you. And of course, having enough RAM definitely speeds up the system. And then on storage space, it's measured in gigabytes or terabytes. You can get a hard disk drive or an SSD, and the SSDs, I put 4 to 40 on the last one because you can get some really slow ones out there. But 10 to 40 times faster usually. Just as a note to throw this in, just as a note, if you have an older notebook, putting in an SSD and replacing your HDD, your hard disk drive, is something that will really speed up the system and give it more life. It really does, because it is so much faster. And then, of course, having more storage space doesn't speed up a system. You know, the storage space is where you're putting your things. You got enough to put all your stuff, then that's what's important. That's what you want to do. All right, that's the end of this one.